Filmmaking is expensive. At least that's what everybody likes to tell me. So today we're going to break down the short films we've made at 5 distinct budget levels. Each budget has its own unique advantages and disadvantages. Now, I'm not going to be going through these in order of highest to lowest or lowest to highest, and that's for a pretty distinct reason, which I think will make sense by the end of this video. So back in 2019, I had just graduated film school and I pretty much moved straight to New York City trying to make it big. I thought I was ready to be a big-time director, and I really wanted to make a film that was on a professional level. So me and my friends got together and wrote a short film that was a super ambitious sci-fi musical set during the apocalypse, and we were going to launch a Kickstarter to raise $40,000. Even though we really had no idea what we were doing, we spent months prepping the campaign, and we were all set to launch on March 1st of 2020. Yeah, obviously the world fell apart. We had to cancel the Kickstarter and cancel the film. Now, at the time, I was devastated. The world fell apart. I didn't know what to do, so I slinked back to my hometown in the rural mountains of Colorado. And after a couple weeks of sitting around watching a bunch of movies and smoking probably too much weed, I got bored and I felt like I was going to go crazy unless I made something. There was no way I could get that $40,000 budget that I thought was necessary to make a short. So I decided, okay, forget that. Let's see what I can do with my own resources, what I have right now, which included 2 friends who were also stuck at home, a camera, and the woods behind my house. So, over the next several weeks, I wrote and shot the film Fester. And by the way, you can watch the film right now. It's in the description. The film cost $300. It ended up being 13 minutes long, which means it cost about $23 per minute. We had a total cast and crew of 3 people, 10 locations, and 3 shooting days. So let's break it down. At the end of each section, I'm going to put a more detailed breakdown of exactly where the budget went for each film. But first, I got to tell you this story. So I knew the only way I could make a film is if I used only what I knew I already had access to. So I came up with a story about a man who escaped the police just as he was being arrested. But now he must run through the woods, survive, and evade the police, all while his hands are still cuffed behind his back. This meant for most of the movie, it's basically one guy running around in the woods, which is extremely shootable. I obviously didn't have the budget for police, so I used a couple clever little tricks to imply police presence without actually having to hire a police car. Things like sound design, having the police always be right off screen and you can hear them but not see them. But to really sell it, I built this custom police light. It was basically a really janky light, and it had 2 gels spinning around, so it gave the impression of flashing blue and red light. Now I could put this in the distance, in the background, out of focus, so bokeh actually looks like police lights. But that only worked because I created a style of filming that made it make sense in the story. I use pretty much only close-up shots that are really subjective, really shallow focus. Not only does this put us really in the character's mindset and have a really distinct visual language, but it makes you able to get away with a lot more things because you don't really have to show everything. But the only way I could actually make this film a reality is if I learned to collaborate with nature. This meant not viewing nature as an obstacle to overcome in order to shoot, but rather an actual creative force in the project. For example, we had a scene that I had pictured at a very specific location. But when we got there were way too many people, it was starting to rain, we just couldn't make it work. So I scrambled and found a backup location. And this backup location turned out to be way more beautiful than I had ever anticipated. And the rain broke just as we got there, which created this really beautiful golden light that just really sold the ending of the movie. You gotta be able to weave, to pivot, and if you know the core story and what's really important, it'll still work out. And maybe even better than you hoped. So, what did the money even go toward? Well, luckily for me, my 2 friends were willing to work for free. But that's only because I gave them a real creative stake in the project, and they felt like actual collaborators. It wasn't like I was just telling them what to do. We were all making it together. And getting people invested in that way is so important, whether you're paying them or not. The one huge mistake I made with this film is I didn't hire a sound designer. I just figured, well, there's no dialogue, so I'll just recreate it all with Foley later. Man, that was a mistake. It took me so long. And yeah, I had a lot of control over the soundscape, but a lot of it never ended up sounding quite right because I'm not a professional sound designer. So if you're going to hire one person on your set, please make it the sound person. Don't do what I did. The rest of post I did myself. Luckily, I'm a professional editor, so this was in my wheelhouse, but I'm not a professional colorist, so I taught myself as I was coloring this film. Yeah, it would definitely have looked a little better if I had hired an actual professional colorist, but I just didn't have it in the budget, so I made it happen anyways. And real quick, here's the budget breakdown to show you exactly what the money went to. Okay, so I was really pleased with how this film turned out, but it ended up not really getting into any festivals, not being as successful as I wanted it to. Me being me, I figured it was because we hadn't shot it with like a professional budget. So for the next film, I was gonna up our game. So me and my partner Ayla wrote the film Me and My Gun. We saw this as our big introduction to the world as filmmakers, and we were going all out. Now, by this point, we had realized that our $40,000 Kickstarter we were going to do back in 2019 would have been doomed no matter what. We simply didn't have the means or the network to raise that much money. But we did scramble together $10K to make this one. Let's check the stats. The film cost $10,000 and was 18 minutes long, meaning it cost about $444 per minute. We had a cast of 5 people and a crew of 7. 2 locations, and 3 shooting days. So this movie is about a super depressed guy who has an AI gun, and he's trying to prove to his gun that he's mentally stable enough to be able to shoot it. It's a dark, dark comedy. That's also a sci-fi. Now, sci-fi, you might be saying, whoa, doesn't sci-fi mean visual effects? No, it doesn't have to. My favorite type of sci-fi is actually light sci-fi. You know, the sci-fi that's like basically our world, but with one thing that's slightly different. But all we basically had to do was add a voice to the gun.
Please unlock so I can shoot you.
Trigger happy much? We still gotta do setup.
And these simple little tricks can make it seem like your production value is higher. Now, even though this budget was technically 30 times the budget of our previous film, we were still really limited. Because with Fester, we only had 3 people total. We could pivot on a dime, run around. We didn't have to set up or take down any equipment. It was just really fast, really flexible, really easy to shoot. But with Me and My Gun, we were up in our game. This means each shot took a lot longer to set up because we had a lot more equipment and just a bigger crew to organize and keep track of. Now, we really wanted to make this look like a professional film. So we rented a ton of equipment for this shoot, which really is what racked up the budget. And not only renting the equipment, but renting a truck to transport it and pick it up. We had to get insurance so that the rental house would give us the equipment in the first place. We rented a drone to make it seem like the gun was delivered by a drone in the first scene. We rented equipment to make this whole custom rig that allowed us to get this really cool effect of the shadows of raindrops dripping down an actor's face. We loved this shot. But the thing is, when we got to the edit, we ended up cutting it. And we cut the drone shot. So the biggest lesson we learned on this film, it's way easier to cut things when you're in the script stage versus when you're in the edit stage. So I'd advise you, really go over your script, make sure everything in there is absolutely necessary because it would have saved us probably a third of the budget. The dolly was this whole other big expense, and we only ended up using it for 3 shots. Now sure, these 3 shots look good, but looking back on it, I'm like, did we really need a dolly for that? Couldn't we have made it work with just a tripod and it would have been so much cheaper to shoot? The equipment ate up so much of the budget that we still weren't able to pay the crew. So shout out to the Me and My Gun crew that made this whole thing happen just because they were passionate and because they loved us. However, we did still have to feed them. But we saved money this time by cooking. Now, making home-cooked meals is a great way to bring the crew together, make them feel like you really care for them, but it did add a lot of work because basically we would shoot all day and then that night have to prep the meal for the next day's shoot. And as for post, I still edited this one myself, but we did outsource for color and sound, which I will say I think was worth it. It made it look and sound really good, better than I could do on my own. But it did cost a lot of money, even though it was still friends who gave us a deal. But we came out of this film feeling pretty good about ourselves. We felt like we had gone to the next level with our shoots, and we were ready to push it even further. Before we move on, here's a quick breakdown of the costs of Me and My Gun. So right after this, I was brought on as a co-director for the short film adaptation of the New York Times Critics' Pick play, Stalking the Boogeyman. I was excited because we were shooting this for $40K. Coincidentally, that same number that I was going for when I first came to New York City right after film school. I thought this was my moment, that I had made it. I was making a real professional film. So let's check the stats. Stalking the Boogeyman had a budget of $40,000. The final film ended up being 10 minutes in length. So that brings the cost to $4,000 per minute. It had a cast of 2, a crew of 13, 2 locations, and 3 shooting days. Now, the crazy thing is, if you were a line producer who was just looking at the script to make a budget for all 5 of my short films, you would probably think Stalking the Boogeyman would be by far the cheapest to shoot. The whole film is basically a scene of 2 people talking on a sidewalk. So why did it cost $40,000? Well, me and the producers went all out. We hired an amazing cinematographer who flew in all the way from Estonia. We shot on an Arri Alexa with all the gadgets and lenses and everything you could ask for. And not only that, we had a lot of really talented crew. We had hair and makeup, sound, gaffer, 2 assistant cameras, and they all got paid industry rates. And when you have a professional set at this level, you can't really do home-cooked meals for everybody. So we had personalized takeout for every person every day of the shoot. All of this added up fast, but probably the biggest contributor was that we had 2 well-known actors in the cast. For actors at this level, not only do you have to pay them their rate, but you also have to transport them, put them up, and then, of course, deal with SAG, which could be a whole video on its own. And as for post, I didn't do any of it. I was purely just the director of this film. So we actually hired an editor who worked for months refining the cut. We got color from a top-notch professional color house that made it look really good, had a great sound designer, and we had a custom score composed and recorded for our film. And I haven't even mentioned that part of the film was animated, which meant paying a professional animator to make hand-drawn frame-by-frame animations of certain scenes. So this obviously made the post-production budget go up really fast. So I had finally gotten that coveted budget of $40,000. But did it actually make the film better? I can't say for sure, but I can speak to how it significantly changed the process of making the film. So we basically had 3 full days to shoot one 7-page scene that was very simple with no blocking, just 2 characters standing and talking to each other. And there's not even really any fancy shots, it's basically just over-the-shoulder shots. We basically finished shooting the scene within the first day, and then we had 2 more days scheduled and budgeted with everyone already hired. So the next day we were just doing the same scene again, but with slightly different angles, slightly different directions for the actors, but it really didn't feel like we were going anywhere. It felt like we had already gotten it and we were just kind of spinning our wheels. Now, I could feel the crew and the actors kind of getting annoyed, and that, I think, is the biggest danger of having too many resources. When you have a limited amount of resources, you're really forced to be creative and use everything to the absolute maximum of its capacity. But when you can do anything, it all starts to feel aimless, and I don't think it helps the film. Before we move on, here's the budget breakdown for Stalking the Boogeyman. So after we shot this film, if I'm honest, I felt kind of stuck. I felt like now that I had a taste for this big budget professional set, I couldn't go back to what I was doing before. But I didn't have a way to raise that $40,000 budget on my own, so I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. But then, out of nowhere, me and a couple of my friends decided to have a little creative retreat at our friend's house in rural Pennsylvania. And we did this brainstorming exercise where we just kind of wrote down random things, whatever was on our mind, onto sticky notes and put them up on the wall. Then we tried to see what connections we could get between those sticky notes. And one of the sticky notes had this phrase, "I've never been upstairs."
I've never been upstairs. But this, no, okay. This is.
Shout out to Noah who wrote it. And that phrase just really started rattling around in my brain. So for the rest of the day, as we hung out in the house, played music, cooked food, went on a little hike, I just kept thinking about that phrase until eventually a story just basically popped into my head, fully formed out of nowhere. So I wrote it down. That night, I pitched it to the team, and they said, "Holy cow, we have to make this as a film in this house." In 1 month, we returned to the house and shot the film. I've never been downstairs. Now, this film cost $1,500 and the final film length was 20 minutes. That means the cost per minute was $75. We had a cast of 3, a crew of 6, 2 locations, and 2 shooting days. Now, the reason this film happened so fast was because it was based entirely around the house I knew we already had access to. It was really unique. It went in the middle of the woods with these huge glass windows, and it gave us a lot of production value for almost no money. So shout out to our friend Colin, who basically gave us free reign of his house for a whole weekend to shoot there. Now, we were back down to our bare bones cast and crew, which was actually a good thing because the house wasn't very big. We had to keep it small and we had to be able to move fast and pivot because we were shooting a ton of setups throughout the day. Now, this film was a little too ambitious to shoot in 2 days. The first day, if I'm being honest, didn't go super well. We ended up shooting late into the night. People were getting grumpy and it wasn't super fun. And the next day we had to really buckle down and move fast to be able to get everything made. A big part of the story was this fire that the character is constantly tending to in the house. Now, we were shooting this in the middle of July, so having a fire going in a house all day got pretty hot and pretty uncomfortable. But we were all in it together, and the craziest thing that I felt coming from the 40K set was that it really felt like a team. It didn't feel like everyone was just there doing their jobs. We were all creatively invested in the project because we had all basically come up with it together. So even though it was a pretty challenging shoot, we all felt really good and really fulfilled by the end of it. For post, I edited the whole thing again and I ended up coloring it myself. I was getting better, so it looked a little better. But we did outsource sound because sound is super important. And real quick, here's the budget breakdown for I've Never Been Downstairs. So after I've Never Been Downstairs, I was at a little bit of a crossroads. On one hand, I wanted to keep working with bigger sets that gave me more legitimacy as a filmmaker, but on the other hand, I had a really good time and felt much more creatively fulfilled shooting I've Never Been Downstairs. All this time, I'd been writing a feature film, and so I wanted to make a short film as a proof of concept to sell the feature. Trip Trap was shot in 2025 in our apartment in New York City for $800. The final film was 12 and a half minutes, which means it cost $64 per minute, had a cast of 5, a crew of 5, 1 location, and just 1 shooting day. Now, this was our tightest production yet, just 1 shooting day. But luckily, we were shooting it all in our apartment, so it was actually pretty feasible. We had the day scheduled precisely so we could take advantage of the natural light coming and going to make it seem like more time was passing than it actually was. And shooting in your apartment is great because it's free, you can set up the lights beforehand, and nobody's gonna kick you out if you end up going over. We paid our crew. We made a home-cooked meal. We only used equipment that our DP already had. And yes, this means we couldn't do fancy dolly shots or anything like that. But that's okay, because we shaped the aesthetic of the film around our limitations. And I used that idea of having a static camera for almost the entire film to make the ending really hit. Because once the horror finally comes to the surface, the camera goes crazy, moving all over the place. But we didn't have the equipment to get these sorts of crazy camera movements with our actual main camera. So I used an Insta360 instead. Yes, it's a lower quality than the main camera, but since we incorporated it into the story, into the character's headspace, it still worked. So you can still be creative and use cheaper stuff to get the same emotional effect. And for post, I again edited and colored it. Now, luckily, we were awarded a grant, which technically increased our budget. Shout out Vanishing Angle for giving us that. Thank you, appreciate you. But the crazy thing is, so far, this film has been the most successful of any of our films, even though it was the second cheapest to make. And here's the budget breakdown for Trip Trap. So this is all to say that getting a big budget for your film is not going to solve all your problems. What will solve all your problems is learning to work within your creative limitations, learning what's actually important like story and character, and really honing in on these will save you so much more money in the long run. So what's next for us? We're scaling up this mentality to make our first feature film. It's a sci-fi rom-com called Divine Timing, and it's about using time travel to make sure your girlfriend loves you before you propose. I'm so excited about this project. We're shooting it this summer, and you can check the link in the description to learn more about it.